What Fits by Seigla Medical. This is an overview of the importance of the dimensions of a guide catheter extension and the influence that those dimensions have on what fits inside them. A guide catheter extension is made up of four components: a hub, a push rod, a collar, and a distal shaft. The push rod and collar reside within the guide catheter. The distal shaft extends beyond the guide catheter and into the vasculature. In the proximal segment of the guide catheter, the push rod alone sits within the guide. This is shown as the orange dot on the left. In the distal segment beyond the collar, the distal shaft alone resides within the guide, shown as the orange circle on the right. When introducing a single device, the push rod and the device naturally align themselves to the guide diameter in the proximal segment. Distally, a single device resides within the ID of the distal shaft. This becomes more interesting when using multiple devices, as shown. Proximally, when two devices are introduced, they align themselves to the guide catheter diameter. The push rod sits parallel and is unimportant when determining what fits. Distally, the two devices align themselves to the diameter of the guide extension shaft. The distal lumen diameter governs what fits, not the push rod. Simply put, within a larger lumen, more equipment can be introduced. Push rod dimensions. You may hear different terms such as effective ID and device passageway, which are marketing terms used by other companies to describe the differences in push rod dimensions. Some graphics are shown here. What these graphics are attempting to describe is the difference between a flat push rod and a round push rod in the proximal portion of the extension. We at Seigla would ask the question, so what? How is this clinically relevant? And simply put, what fits? Distal lumen dimensions are more important than push rod dimensions, and Seigla has designed the LiquID device accordingly. The internal lumen dimensions of our 6 French device has a distal ID of 0.061. Our 7 French device has a distal ID of 0.071. So basically, our 6 French device has the same distal lumen as everyone else's 7, and our 7 French device has the same distal lumen as everyone else's 8. The difference you can see very clearly on the right hand side. The lumen shown is the collar of our LiquID device compared to a guide extension with a typical internal lumen. We also provide procedural guidance for LiquID device compatibility. Here is a poster designed to be on a cath lab wall, and in it shows which devices are compatible or what fits in our 6 and 7 French devices. For example, a 4O shockwave balloon and a buddy wire fits in our 6 French device. They don't fit in any other device. A microcatheter can be trapped with a dedicated trapping device in the distal shaft of our 6 French device. They don't fit in any other device. Two 5O NC balloons fit in our 7 French device. They don't fit in any other 7 French device. A 1.5 rotabur fits in our 7 French device. So simply put, more equipment fits with fewer limitations. Here we show the compatibility of a 5O Megatron stent, a 6 French liquid in a 6 French guide catheter. Looking at the proximal segment first, we see a cut 6 French guide catheter, a 5O Megatron stent from Boston Scientific, extending through that cut segment with an 018 push rod of the LiquID device lying parallel. With these stent delivery systems, the largest profiles are the waists of the balloon that the stents are mounted on. Specifically, the proximal waist has the largest profile. However, these devices sit within the guide easily, and the push rod conforms to the waist as in the image shown. In the distal section, the device enters through the proximal collar of the 6 French liquid with ease. This is because of the 061 size of the distal shaft of the liquid device. When introducing the same 50 megatron stent through the collar of a 6 French guide liner, resistance is soon felt as the stent passes up the distal shaft. In Seigla's experience, this is because of the smaller ID of the distal shaft, and in simple terms, it doesn't fit. Here we have a benchtop demonstration to determine what fits in a 6 French system. The setup is as follows. We have a guide extension sitting in the guide catheter and extending out the distal end. We have a first wire that extends parallel to the push rod into the guide catheter and out the distal end of the extension. We have a second wire that also extends into the guide catheter and out the extension, showing a parallel wire or buddy wire setup. Here we will demonstrate a 6 French cordless guide plus a 6 French LiquID Guide Extension plus a buddy wire plus a Boston Scientific IVUS catheter. Over one wire, parallel to the push rod and parallel to the other guide wire, goes the IVUS catheter. We advance it through from the guide catheter and into the guide extension and out the distal end. So we have a wire in parallel to the IVUS device in the distal segment of the liquid. It fits. In the exact same test setup, we have the 6 French cordless guide, a 6 French boosting catheter from QX Medical, a buddy wire, and the same IVUS catheter from Boston Scientific. Here, the IVUS goes in parallel to the push rod and the wire, and then extends in to the distal shaft portion of the smaller ID QX Medical boosting catheter. Here you struggle. There's a lot of resistance. You are ultimately able to push the very distal end out, but the resistance is too high. It's very difficult to pull back, and simply put, this does not fit. In this example, we have a 4.0 PK papyrus stent extending from the proximal segment through the guide catheter parallel to the liquid push rod. The covered portion has the largest profile for this device. Here again, the device sits parallel to the push rod and easily passes through the proximal collar and up through the 6 French liquid with ease. Here we can see a 6 French liquid, a 4.0 shockwave balloon, and a buddy wire. Let's say you were treating an LAD and you want to protect an important diag. Here we have an image of the liquid push rod, an 014 guide wire passing through the hub into the distal shaft. You also see a 4.0 shockwave balloon aligning itself with the push rod and the 014 wire. In this multiple device scenario, the balloon, the push rod, and the extra wire pass through the collar and through the larger 061 lumen. The liquid device can accommodate both devices when other extensions simply cannot. Here is a clinical image of a 4.0 shockwave balloon with a buddy wire protecting a side branch through a 6 French liquid. Here we have another multiple device scenario. A 5.0 NC emerge balloon fitting through a 7 French guide catheter into the distal segment of a 7 French liquid device. In parallel, a second 5.0 NC emerge balloon extends from the 7 French guide catheter and through the collar of the 7 French liquid. We now have multiple devices aligning across the diameter shown in the earlier slides. In this situation, the push rod isn't part of the dimensional consideration of what fits in the distal segment. The extra space, the 071 at the distal end of the LiquID, however, allows the two devices to fit. A 7 French LiquID device can easily accommodate a 1.5 rotor burr because of the polymer sheath which covers the coil on the rotor shaft. A 7 French guide catheter must be used in all cases. Moving to the distal segment, you can see a 1.5 burr extending into the 7 French LiquID device with ease. The device itself will fit in a 6 French LiquID, but again, because of the polymer sheath, a 7 French guide must be used at all times. To further illustrate compatibility, we have some videos here of a 3.5 Megatron stent and a buddy wire. Here you see the Megatron stent passing through the collar of the Guidezilla. However, as the stent travels further into the distal shaft of the device, friction seems to build within the system and the stent gets stuck. In comparison, using the 6 French LiquID, the exact same stent and buddy wire, you can see the stent sliding in and out through the distal segment with ease. This is because of the 061 size of the distal shaft. In simple terms, it fits. In summary, this compatibility chart is based on actual experience and not on marketing materials. A larger lumen accepts a greater combination of devices. This chart shows exactly what fits in a Seigla 6 and 7 French device. This is not a simple graphic trying to market meaningless dimensions. This chart provides clinical utility, and we hope that we have illustrated through this presentation that pushrod dimensions are less important than what fits.